The summer of 2001 was an illusion. To the American public, it was a season of quiet prosperity. The Cold War was a memory. The economy was adjusting to a new digital age, and the greatest threats to the homeland felt distant, relegated to overseas conflicts and foreign shores. In Crawford, Texas, the newly elected President of the United States, George W. Bush, was settling into a month-long working vacation. The skies were clear. The nation was at peace. But deep inside the windowless corridors of Langley, Virginia, and in the secure briefing rooms of the White House, there was no peace. There was only a deafening, invisible alarm. The men and women tasked with protecting the nation were not enjoying the summer. They were suffocating under an avalanche of intercepted communications, frantic field reports, and a rising tide of terrifying, fragmented whispers. They knew something massive was coming. They knew it was coming soon, and they were desperately trying to make the most powerful people in the world listen before the clock ran out. To understand the tragedy of that summer, you have to look at the shadows. For years, a faction within the U.S. intelligence community had been tracking a man who had declared war on America, though America had largely ignored the declaration. Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network were not a new threat. They had bombed embassies in East Africa. They had nearly sunk the USS Cole in Yemen. They had proven their capability, their patience, and their absolute ruthlessness. By May of 2001, the intelligence chatter, the intercepted communications between known terrorist operatives, began to spike. It wasn't just idle talk, it was the specific, terrifying language of preparation. George Tenet, the director of the CIA, would later describe his state of mind during those weeks as having his hair on fire. He was looking at a global dashboard of threats, and in his own words, the system was blinking red. Informants were disappearing, known operatives were moving, communications would suddenly go dark, a classic sign of operational security right before a strike. The intelligence didn't point to a specific date, a specific time, or a specific target, but the magnitude of the impending event was undeniable. The chatter spoke of a spectacular attack. It spoke of casualties that would inflict catastrophic trauma on the United States. Inside the White House, one man was trying to bridge the gap between this terrifying intelligence and the bureaucratic machinery of the new administration. Richard Clarke was the National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism. A holdover from the Clinton administration, Clarke was viewed by some in the new Bush White House as obsessive, a man crying wolf about a threat that felt too abstract. In late January, just days after the inauguration, Clarke had urgently requested a cabinet-level meeting to discuss the al-Qaeda threat. He warned that the terror group was not some minor nuisance, but a sophisticated, lethal organization actively planning to kill Americans. His request was downgraded. Instead of meeting with the top decision-makers, he was told to brief the deputies. The administration wanted to take a comprehensive, strategic look at the threat, moving away from what they saw as the reactive, whack-a-mole policies of the past. But strategy takes time. Policy reviews take months, and Richard Clarke knew they did not have months. As the spring turned into summer, the warnings grew more frantic. In late June, the intelligence reporting was so alarming that the CIA issued a warning to the military and to U.S. embassies worldwide. The threat was characterized as imminent, but the prevailing assumption among many top policymakers was that any attack would happen overseas.
a strike on an embassy in the Middle East, an attack on a military base in Europe. The idea that a catastrophic attack could occur on the American homeland was acknowledged as a possibility, but it lacked the visceral urgency of a clear and present danger. Then came July 10, 2001. This date remains one of the most chilling missed opportunities in modern history. The chatter had reached such an unbearable crescendo that George Tenet decided to bypass the usual daily briefings. He picked up the phone and demanded an immediate emergency meeting with Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor. Tenet was not a man prone to theatrical panic, but on that Tuesday morning, he traveled to the White House alongside Cofer Black, the chief of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. They sat down in Rice's office with a message so blunt it should have stopped the entire government in its tracks. Cofer Black later recalled the essence of their warning. Significant terrorist attacks were going to start in the coming weeks. They believed the attack would be spectacular, designed to inflict mass casualties, and that it would occur with little or no warning. The men delivering this intelligence were deeply alarmed. They wanted action. They wanted the administration to go on a war footing. Condoleezza Rice listened. She was a brilliant academic, a master of grand strategy and great power politics. But the intelligence being presented was agonizingly frustrating. It was loud, but it was blurry. Who was attacking? They didn't know. Where? They couldn't say. How? They weren't sure. Rice politely heard them out, but the meeting did not result in the mobilization Tenet and Black were hoping for. The administration's focus remained on the long-term comprehensive strategy review. There was no immediate defensive lockdown of the homeland. Tenet and Black left the White House feeling as though they had screamed a warning into a dark, empty room. The heat of July gave way to the sweltering days of August. President Bush was now at his ranch in Crawford. Every morning he received the Presidential Daily Brief, a highly classified document containing the most sensitive intelligence in the world. For weeks, the president had been hearing the drumbeat of threats regarding overseas targets, but he wanted to know about the risk at home. He asked his briefers for an assessment of the threat al-Qaeda posed directly to the United States. The answer arrived on the morning of August 6, 2001. A CIA briefer handed the president a document. The title alone was a siren going off in the quiet Texas morning. Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S. It was a short document, just over a page long, but its contents were devastating. It stated plainly that Osama bin Laden had wanted to conduct terrorist attacks in the U.S. since at least 1997. It noted that FBI information indicated patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for hijackings or other types of attacks, including recent surveillance of federal buildings in New York. The memo explicitly mentioned the World Trade Center by name, referencing the previous 1993 bombing. It stated that 70 full-field investigations into al-Qaeda activity were currently underway by the FBI. This was not a vague warning of an overseas threat. This was a document handed directly to the commander-in-chief, confirming that the enemy was already inside the gates, that they were planning an attack, and that they had a history of utilizing hijackings and targeting specific landmarks. The exact response of the president that morning has been heavily debated and scrutinized. According to several accounts, after reading the brief, President Bush looked at the CIA officer and said, "All right, you've covered your ass now." Whether those words were spoken out of dismissiveness or simply a blunt acknowledgement of a disturbing but unactionable report, the result was the same. The brief was absorbed, but it did not change the trajectory of the government.
The president did not cut his vacation short. No emergency war council was convened. The FBI, hampered by legal walls that prevented the sharing of intelligence with criminal investigators, continued its fragmented work, unaware of the massive plot assembling right under their noses. The FAA was not ordered to radically alter domestic flight security. The system had blinked red, the alarms had sounded, but the bureaucratic inertia of the United States government proved too heavy to move. The tragedy of August 6th brief is not that it contained the exact blueprint of 9/11. It did not mention the date. It did not mention using commercial airliners as guided missiles. It was analytical, looking at historical patterns, but it was the final screaming warning that the danger was not over there. It was here. As August bled into September, the frantic chatter intercepted by the CIA began to change. It didn't get louder, it got quiet. The sudden drop in communications sent a wave of cold dread through the counterterrorism center. They knew what the silence meant. It meant the planning phase was over. It meant the operatives were in place. It meant the countdown had begun, and there was nothing left to say. Richard Clarke spent the first 10 days of September in a state of agonizing anxiety, pushing for the final approval of the strategy to eliminate al-Qaeda, a strategy that would only be officially adopted on September 4, more than 7 months into the administration. On September 10, the Principals Committee finally agreed to present the plan to the president. It was too late. The advisors had seen the storm gathering. They had tracked the atmospheric pressure dropping, watched the dark clouds forming over the horizon, and they had run to the leaders of the nation to tell them the hurricane was about to make landfall. But because they couldn't name the street where the tornado would touch down, the warnings were treated as weather reports rather than a call to evacuate. The intelligence was accurate, but the imagination of the policymakers failed. They could not conceive of an enemy capable of turning a bright Tuesday morning into an apocalyptic nightmare. They could not imagine the unimaginable until they watched it unfold on live television. The warnings of 2001 stand as a haunting monument to the limits of human perception. We can gather all the data in the world, intercept every message, and connect the dots in real time. But if the people in power are unwilling to see the picture those dots create, the intelligence is useless. The system didn't fail to sound the alarm. The alarm was simply ringing in a house that refused to wake up. But while the world was forever changed by what happened on that September morning, it wasn't the only time a matter of minutes altered the course of human history. If you want to understand how a single isolated decision can bring the globe to the brink, click the video on your screen now to watch the 45-minute strike that triggered a global crisis. The clock is already ticking.